Welcome to Issues That Matter. I'm Cynthia Pooler. My guest today is Diane Sare, and Diane and I are going to talk about the whole Biden situation. So, Diane, the floor is yours. What's your thoughts?
Well, thank you very much. I think it's really up in the air as the clamor mounts, apparently, for him to step down. Someone told me this morning 25 congressmen are saying he should drop out. Look, we've just been lied to about his capabilities. It was obvious to anyone watching that he has been having trouble uh, since before he quote unquote won the 2020 presidential election. And then it was months ago, I think, that he couldn't remember. He was calling President El-Sisi of Egypt the president of Mexico. He has been lured into making dangerously irresponsible statements about defending Taiwan by reporters on various occasions. These are all signs of mental infirmity, of old age. And then the courts also determined that he was not fit to stand trial, I believe, in this one of these cases
I
about
remember
classified
that.
documents or his son or whatever. So if you have a president of the United States that you say is not in mental shape to stand trial, how could that person be entrusted with making decisions about whether to launch a nuclear war or even less than that? I think it's extremely dangerous. It's highly irresponsible. It also indicates clearly that there are people who arrogantly believe that they have the right to run the country, and they don't care if the president is merely a dysfunctional face on a rotten policy.
So, I've been watching Jill Biden, and that reminds me of like reading about history and Wilson's wife. I mean, is Jill a participant in running the country?
I don't know. I think she's probably a participant in drugging her husband. She's an educator, and one of the terrible things that's been occurring in the schools, as I'm sure you're aware, is they're putting exceptionally gifted and bright students who might be bored in the classroom on any kind of prescription drugs, Ritalin or this or that. Uh, so maybe she's behind that kind of activity because he doesn't look well. And she must have a really out of control ego or some other motivation. Our friend Ray McGovern
Mm-hmm.
believes that the Biden team, not merely Joe, Hunter, Jill, others, but all of these people, the DNC, the people who made up the Russiagate hoax, etc., are extremely nervous about a Trump presidency because they fear that they will be investigated and brought to justice. Sounds plausible to me. That's what Ray McGovern has said. I don't think that's the only reason why they would be concerned, but if you have been engaged in all kinds of crimes against the people of the United States, there would be some reason to worry about that.
So you think that's a big motivating factor involved in the scare tactics on, let's say, MSNBC not to vote for Trump?
I'm sure it is. I think that Trump is, in a way, scary enough, but not nearly as scary as Biden. And as you may know, my position is that we're in a terrible crisis because we actually don't have a qualified presidential contender.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate that Donald Trump, as Robert Kennedy Jr. have said, that the West is really responsible for the war in Ukraine, that it was NATO expansion, that it should be ended, that it could be ended. That's very useful and important. So I don't want to take that away from Donald Trump or Kennedy. But on the other hand, both of them have been adamantly defending Israel's right to do whatever it wants
Mm-hmm.
and commit genocide against the population of Gaza. And I don't think that any American really could argue that a person who would allow the slaughter of tens of thousands of women and children with our weapons and our taxpayer dollars should be occupying the White House. So that's the problem that we're facing as a nation.
Now you're for all of our listeners, um, you're running against Kirsten Gillibrand as an independent. Now I think there's a little clique in Washington, and Kirsten is one of them. Joe Biden is one of them. The Clintons. Um, so there's a small group of people that they have to choose from who's going to run for president. Would you agree?
You mean they feel that there's this, oh yeah, I don't know what they're I mean, I don't know what they're going to choose from. And that's what I'll tell you. I was in Manhattan yesterday. It's the first time I've been interfacing with the people of New York since the debate. Now, two things. One did not have to do with the debate, but for some reason, the Zionists are on a rampage. I was set up on the Upper West Side, and all the poles next to our literature table were covered with faces of the hostages. And of course, I don't advocate taking people hostage, and my heart goes out to the hostages and their family members. But one wrong does not justify another wrong or collective punishment. So there was some real almost violence directed toward us there from people supporting the genocide. But the other thing that people were saying to me is that their children, people who are parents of young adult children who are following the elections, one lady said, "My daughter is really terrified. She's terrified when she looked at the debate and saw the quality of our two leading presidential candidates, and she's wondering what her future is and where this nation is going." And that's really what we picked up in the street yesterday, a great deal, I think, of well-founded anxiety that we are on the cusp of multiple wars, the Middle East, and that could spin out of control involving Hezbollah, Iran, and Russia and China. China, which we're have a lot of saber rattling against, and then war with Russia. And we don't have a president or a candidate or a presidential opposition in that sense, which, by the way, Cynthia, is the reason I decided to run for US Senate. I don't have currently, or didn't have at the time, the resources required or the base to run a viable presidential campaign, but a US Senator from New York is a pretty important position.
Mm-hmm.
And I chose to run for that seat because I wanted to add my voice to provide some kind of mooring of sane leadership to the nation, which hopefully can have an effect in shaping the policy that would come out of the Congress, the Senate, and any future administration.
So, almost 4 years ago, on election night, the numbers were fudged against you, correct? Okay.
Well, yeah, yeah, the
Okay.
amazing disappearing vote totals. Yes.
Right. So, can you give us figures on what you got and what ultimately the public saw?
Yeah, and it gets even more interesting because when I got the county by county figures before they switched them with the what's called the blank vote, where people supposedly went in and didn't cast the Senate vote, I should have had well over 100,000 or close to 250,000 votes in New York. What they credited me with on election night was about 57,000. I don't have a screenshot of that because I didn't expect the number to start going down. So the first screenshot I got is at 53,000 or 55,000 perhaps. A friend of mine in France started taking pictures when the vote started going down. So it was 55,000, 57,000 when I went to bed. When I got up in the morning, my total number of votes was down to 29,000,
Mm.
even though more votes had been counted. And by the end of the week, my vote, somehow 4,000 more votes disappeared and my vote went down to 25,000.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
Yeah.
So ultimately,
And now people say, "Do you think, are you an election denier?" Well, I experienced it firsthand,
mhm,
witnessed it firsthand. I don't know why anyone thinks that our CIA and other agencies would meddle in foreign elections and not meddle in our own elections.
wow, that's a pretty powerful statement. So, um, I think that from my perspective, Gillibrand is a weaker senator than Schumer is.
That's true.
He
He's
is
also less well known. A lot of people, you say Gillibrand and they say who?
really.
Yeah.
So, do you think that the establishment is really nervous about your campaign?
Yes, they're so nervous that they're trying desperately to suppress it, but it's not working. It's beginning to break out. Um, and we're getting some kind of interesting harassment on the streets in Manhattan, which indicates that it is threatening to break out. Uh, yeah. So they are nervous. They don't want any opposite. I mean, you'd say, why would they have to steal your vote if I had 1.5% as opposed to 0.5%, or if I had 2.5%, I wasn't going to win the election. So why was it so necessary to claim that only 1/3 of the people who signed a petition to put my name on the ballot actually voted for me? Because they want to demoralize people. This is the point about the great lie, just like the shadow banning, where I discover that I have a live YouTube stream, which has 75 people watching it at any given moment. We end the live stream and I see how many views it has, and it says 6.
Really?
Yes. So they just want everyone to think that they're the only person following my campaign as a way of making people be silent, not letting them get too enthusiastic about it all.
So ultimately, at the presidential level, what is going to happen from your perspective?
I think it is totally unpredictable. We may have two completely different candidates than Trump and Biden, or Kennedy. I pray that neither Trump nor Kennedy comes into harm's way. I think there's also possibility of, we saw the assassination attempt against the prime minister of the Czech Republic.
Right.
That'd be a way to completely throw the United States into chaos. I think we're in a very unstable situation, and I think this is why it's so important that the American people stop acting like an election is a sports event or a tribal showdown, and they have a laundry list. As a candidate, I get, where do you stand on the environment? Where do you stand on abortion? Where do you stand on gun control? We're about to have a thermonuclear war. You're about to lose everything that you hold dear. You can't afford groceries. You can't afford rent. Would you like someone leading the country who's actually a thoughtful human being? Or do
Mhm.
you want a robot to answer a series of multiple choice, single issue questions, which give you no idea how that person will respond in the type of crisis that we are now facing?
Now, I'm a little bit older than you, but I've been watching politics for many years, and I'm sure with your interest in politics, you have also. Do you remember anything going back as far as you can think, anything this chaotic?
there's a couple points of chaos which aren't like this. I have vague memories of the Nixon Watergate scandal. I was a child, young at the time, but I remember it was sort of an uproar and people didn't exactly know how that was going to play out or who would be running the country. And I remember the 2020 election where we had two horrible choices once again, Gore and Bush. And it wasn't,
That was 2000.
oh yeah, I mean 2000, the two and all the zeros, correct, 2000, um, Gore and Bush. And that was somewhat destabilizing as well, although frankly, the policies of those two gentlemen are not that different. So, except Gore would have been more cognizant of what he was doing, and Bush was run by Dick Cheney. So, that was a dangerous time as well, but nothing like this. And it's because we're at the end of a system. The old transatlantic financial liberal system, the idea of the US as the global hegemon, this thing is all crashing and burning. It's over. And the sooner that we faced that and actually looked for those things about the founding of our nation that made us exceptional at the time, which was our commitment against colonialism, the reason why we defeated the British Empire, if we would choose that identity, the world would be a lot better off. And I'll tell you, Cynthia, I saw a message from President Lukashenko of Belarus congratulating the United States and the American people on our Independence Day. And it was a beautiful message saying, may you have beautiful sunshine and warm skies. And I forget the whole text of it, but clearly hoping to evoke, trying to find that spark of goodness in the American people and in the idea of what our nation ought to be doing.
So, everything is up in the air. Let me ask you this, and this is the most important thing from my perspective. You and I have talked many times about the threat of nuclear war. Do these people in Washington understand it the way they do? Are they as fearful of losing their lives in the thermonuclear war as maybe you, I, Scott Ritter, whatever, as they might be?
Well, I can tell you from the symposium that was pulled together by Helga Zepp-LaRouche of the Schiller Institute at the National Press Club, where we ended up Lawrence Wilkerson spoke, Scott Ritter, Colonel Richard Black, all addressed it, and then Steve Starr, who's a nuclear weapons expert, who's a professor in Missouri. All of them said, I don't know that many people in Washington, but each of them has various inroads, and they said, no, the danger, part of the reason the danger is so great is that people no longer have any clue. And what Steve Starr has told me is actually the Department of Energy is spending a lot of money trying to get new studies done that show that there is no fireball when there's a nuclear bomb dropped. I mean, things that people witnessed and experienced with Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They're
Uh,
now trying to rewrite, change the laws of physics, the laws of the universe, and make it seem plausible that there is a way of winning or surviving a nuclear war. And that is extremely dangerous. And I don't think this is the first thing on the minds of most of our members of Congress.
so when you turn on the TV and let's say you put MSNBC on and you see Pelosi and you see your opponent, Gillibrand, talk about what's going to transpire over the next few months, and you do not hear them say anything about a nuclear war. Doesn't that frighten them?
They know, they're oblivious, and I guess they think they're above it. And frankly, Pelosi is quite up in years, very much like Biden.
Right.
So I'm not sure And I think she has a drinking problem on top of it. So I'm not really sure what they understand. And these people tend to live in isolated little worlds where somehow reality and the suffering of the vast numbers of human beings on the planet doesn't really affect them.
So let's close with this, Diane. What do you think ultimately is going to happen?
Well, let me say what I hope will happen, which there is a possibility of, because I think it's very unpredictable. I think we're on a knife's edge. Uh, I am hopeful that some patriots in the United States are going to get out their trumpets and trombones and pots and pans, metaphorically speaking, to wake up some of these elected officials and get across to them that we are on a trajectory to self-annihilation and that this has to be changed and that there is a new paradigm in the world and that other nations would only be too happy to welcome the United States if we were acting like ourselves. And I will just say, Cynthia, you may have seen it, but I wrote a statement for the 4th of July
I saw
based on John Quincy Adams' message in Washington for July 4th, 1821, which apparently was distributed as a pamphlet. And it's very beautiful because he outlines in it why the United States, what was the great contribution of the United States to mankind. And his answer was that it was, in a sense, the affirmation of what he called the inextinguishable rights of man, and therefore the government, the type of government that flowed from that. And that he said with some pride that in the 45 years of our existence at that time, we had not invaded any other nation. We were not seeking monsters abroad to destroy, but that we were the well-wisher of independence and aspirations of other peoples, but we were only going to fight for our own. And I want to clarify, this doesn't mean that Quincy Adams was an isolationist. I believe he was our first ambassador to Russia, but he understood that relations among nations must flow from the principle of the inextinguishable rights of humanity, of each human being.
You know,
So
mm, you're running against the establishment, and the establishment does not want new people in there. They will do anything in their power to make candidates like you disappear. That can't go on forever. There's got to be a breaking point. There's got to be a point where something happens that the old guard has to go away and fresh faces like you have to emerge. And I don't see that happening in the near future. What do you think?
well, it has to happen in the near future. And actually, there have the most massive changes of mankind have only been apparent to very few, like the wall coming down in Berlin in Germany, which Lyndon LaRouche forecast a year before it happened, but everyone else said that was an absurd idea. Uh, or you think of earthquakes. We're not very good at predicting earthquakes, but I know a scientist with the Russian Academy of Sciences who actually can predict them quite accurately with 2 or 3 weeks notice because there are changes in the atmosphere. There are changes of energy and magnetic fields, which would allow you to know that. So while we may see an earthquake and say, oh my gosh, no one could have possibly known this or predicted it, actually there were elements leading into that. We are at such a moment, and our future depends on a kind of political earthquake happening in the United States. And I do think it's possible, and I think it could happen sooner than people expect.
So when you first threw your hat in the ring for Schumer to run against Schumer, did you anticipate down the line that we would be in this situation we're in right now?
Yes,
You did.
because of what was being done then, and the fact that people like myself and Scott could be placed on Ukrainian kill lists and our Senate would not respond indicates that there was a commitment to head in a certain direction.
Okay.
So I couldn't have predicted all of the exact contours of the situation, but it was clear we were headed towards something like this.
So, tomorrow is July 4th, so we have the summer and part of the fall before the election. I hope you'll come back on Issues That Matter to share your thoughts.
Well, thanks very much. I look forward to doing so.
Thank you, Diane. You've been listening to Diane Sare. I'm Cynthia Pooler. This is Issues That Matter. And if you like this show, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Diane, have a great holiday and thank you everybody for listening.